20. A snake? Austin repeated, wide-eyed. I nodded limply. Yeah, I screwed up. I'd seen the snake when I snuck into the stables earlier, and I thought it was strange, but I didn't see its attack coming. I downed the glass of water in my hand, but it did nothing to wipe away the bitterness in my mouth. Strange how? Asked Argo, who had returned to room 17 from the casino before we got back. She was trying to keep the conversation going, not because it was her nature as an info agent, but because she could tell I was devastated. I appreciated her kindness and lifted my head. The snake was only an inch or so around, so the stables they kept it in behind bars were even smaller. More like a mesh fence, really. But when you saw the golden cage they fight in the arena, right? The bars are about 4 inches apart, so it occurred to me when I saw it that the snake would just slither right out into the audience. If only I'd held on to that suspicion and considered what it might mean, I lamented, getting down on myself all over again. This time it was Kismel who said, meaning that the Korloi family was keeping that snake not as a combatant in the arena, but for the sole purpose of allowing it to attack Lady Ninir. And they moved it from the special cage to a normal one before the inspection? I looked up, straight at the dark elf sitting across from me, and nodded. It's the only answer I can understand. When she was bitten, Bardun Korloi and his butler, Mendon, didn't seem surprised or bothered in the least. If anything, I thought, I saw a thin smile on Bardun's lips. Ninir's collapse put an end to the inspection, and I rushed after Kyo, who carried her master back to the room on the 3rd floor of the hotel. I assumed she was going to bring a doctor to the girl, but Kyo instead took Ninir into the bedroom, and they had not emerged in nearly 20 minutes. Huazo and Lunze were outside the door for protection, while the other 2 members returned to the stable on Kyo's orders, but there were no sign of being able to resume the inspection, so presumably whatever criminal evidence was hidden in that storage space had been moved elsewhere by now. Was the development of the snake ambush a preordained event within the quest or a spontaneous happening caused by other factors? There was no way to know at this point. If the former, there should still be a way to save Ninir, but the latter, perhaps we might see a repeat of what happened with Lord Silent of Statchen. I plunged into a swamp of unease and regret once again. But my left knee suddenly felt warm. I looked up and saw Asuna smiling next to me, her hand resting on my leg. She met my gaze and nodded with purpose. It's all right, Kirito. A little snake venom isn't going to take out Lady Ninir. She didn't present any evidence for that claim, but I decided to agree with her and nodded slowly in return. Yeah, you're right. That's right. We haven't even gotten the quest reward for one thing, added Argo, grinning wickedly. More seriously, she said, plus, there's still more we can do. Huh? Like what? There might be a cure for that snake venom. Keyboy, what was the name of the snake that bit Lady Ninir? And my mind went blank for a moment. Then I realized she was right. I'd read somewhere that only special antibodies called antivenom produced by humans and other animals would counteract snake venom. But that was in the real world. A random snake antidote from a street seller probably wouldn't do the trick. Q would have used one right away if that were true. But there could certainly be a medicinal item just for that particular snake. I stared at the surface of the table, willing my memory to cough up the answer. I'd only seen the something or other serpent on the color cursor for a moment, but I couldn't recall it. I was a failure of a top player. I thought not of the word itself, but the mental image of it, the visual snapshot I still contained in my memory, and read out the English letters. I I think it started with an A. I think it was Argent Serpent. I don't know what the first word means, I said. Asuna and Argo glanced at each other, then spoke at the same time. It's silver! That's silver! Silver? Why isn't it just silver then? I asked. It was a very straightforward question, but Asuna glanced at Kismel with some concern before saying, silver comes from German, argent from French. Ah, I see, I murmured, then realized what Asuna's concern was about. Kismel, this world's language was, well, Einkredese. There was no distinction between Japanese, English, or German. Fortunately, Kismel didn't seem to be hung up on what she said. If anything, the pensive look on her face said that she was hung up on something else instead. Before I could ask her what it was, the knight blinked and looked right at me. Are you certain that the snake that bit Lady Ninir was called an Argent Serpent? Yeah, are you familiar, Kismel? Only by name, but if true, this is no trifling matter. At the very least, you will not find the antidote in any town of humankind, Kismel claimed with certainty. I stared at her, distraught, and asked faintly, why is that? Now it was Kismel's turn to hesitate. After a few moments, she said quietly, in the old words, Lady Ninir is known as a Dominus Nocte, a Lord of the Night. Lord of the Night. The three of us repeated in unison. I'd never heard that phrase in Aincrad before, not even in the beta test. Asuna, however, gasped after a moment, and Argo, who sat on the other side of Kismel, murmured to herself. The two of them made eye contact, then Asuna whispered to Kismel, are you saying she's a vampire? What? Only tensing my jaw could keep me from shouting that exclamation out loud. Ninir? No way. The thought struck me as ludicrous, but all the supporting evidence suddenly fell into place in my mind. The heavy curtains over the windows, even during the day, her exclusive beverage of choice, red wine, the heavy cloak she wore before going to the stable, the wall Keo had us make before she crossed the light of the sunset. All of these things gave credence to Asuna's suggestion. Eventually, Asuna nodded, almost imperceptibly. That is another name, but you should not repeat it here. The Lords of the Night are not ghouls wandering the graveyard at night. They are a proud people. Some of them live far longer than we elves, from what I hear. Wow, I murmured. Then I recalled something and asked the knight, is that why you knelt when you greeted Ninir for the first time? Because you knew she was a Dominus Nocte? That's right. I saw one of them at the castle when I was a child, just once. But I could tell from her airs. Ah, I exhaled, trying to recollect my stunned wits. I was shocked to learn that Ninir was a vampire, or a Lord of the Night, but that did not change the fact that she was my quest client, or the fondness that I felt for her. And vampires were an RPG staple. It almost seemed strange that we hadn't come across one before now. And when you say this is no trifling matter, what did you... I realized the answer before I could finish the question. The classic vampire weakness were garlic, sunlight, and silver. In fact, the very first time we visited this room, Kyo pulled my short sword out of its sheath and said, plain steel. She had been checking to make sure it wasn't silver. I didn't know if she was weak to garlic, but there was no question that walking in the late sun gave Ninir a kind of weakened status. In retrospect, the black circle with spikes on the icon was probably supposed to be the sun, so it couldn't have been a coincidence that the snake that bit her had the word for silver in its name. So, is the poison from the Argent Serpent only effective against a Dominus Nocte? And that's why it's not easy to find an antidote? I asked. I don't know for certain, Kismil hedged, but I know that the Argent Serpent lives in deep, deep caves and lives on the silver ores. Its scales are made of fine silver and can be sold for a high price. And the silver venom that drips from its fangs, once smeared on a weapon, will provide extra power against ghouls and wraiths. Naturally, a Dominus Nocte is a rare and elite being, but a silver is a dreadful poison to a lord of night. It is similar to how dry lands sap the strength from the elves. I couldn't help but clench my jaw. A poison that could augment a weapon had been poured straight into Ninir's veins. If I hadn't remembered the Argent Serpent's name properly and told Kyo or Ninir before the inspection, it would not have come to this disaster. There was a fury setting in my blood to boiling, and it was not entirely at my own foolishness. Bardun Corloy, his butler Mendon, and all of their soldiers knew that Ninir was a Lord of the Night, not just a regular human. That was why they opened the loading bay door to flood the room with sunlight, just to inconvenience her, and not just because that it might have been to intentionally weaken her so her reflexes were slower. They moved the Argent Serpent to a normal cell and waited for Ninir to walk closer before setting it upon her. At the very moment that he demanded she be present for the inspection, Bardun intended to poison Ninir with silver. Of course, this could have been the written scenario for this quest all along, but Bardun had stared down at Ninir, collapsed and weakened, and leered at her. He was saying, "This is what you deserve." Kismel, is there any way to counteract the silver poison? I asked, knowing it was a futile question, but I couldn't go without asking. Amid the pained silence, the knight just shook her head. But then a hard, tense voice spoke, filling the living room. There is one way. I spun around to see that the door to the bedroom had opened at some point, revealing Kyo, the battle maid. Her face was just as pale as Ninir's had been when she fainted. For an instant, I thought that perhaps Kyo was a vampire, or Dominus Nocte, too, but then I remembered that she had been perfectly fine in the midday sun when helping us with the decolorant for the rusty Lycian and the healing herbs. For another thing, Ninir was the descendant of the long-dead Falhari, and her parents were dead too, for all I knew. As long as they didn't die from accidents or murdered, that suggested that her family members were average humans. So did Ninir turn vampiric due to some experience in her life? Or was she a foster child with no blood relation to her parents? At this point in time, that was far from important. I stood up from the couch and took a few steps towards Kyo. You said there's a way? Is there some medicine that will cure Lady Nir? More importantly, is she all right now? Come this way, Kyo said, beckoning with her hand before silently returning to the bedroom. We rushed after her. The bedroom was almost entirely dark, with only a lamp at her bedside, glowing a mysterious pale green. It was not a fire shining with the enclosed glass, but a bonfire shroom, like the ones in the hidden passage from the plaza. In that cool light, Ninir was visible on the bed, her eyes closed. Her eyelids and long flowing hair were absolutely still, which made me nervous that she was no longer alive, but the visible HP bar had about 30% left, where it was still. Below the bar were two icons, a silver snake with a black background, silver poisoning, I presumed, and a blue flower on a black background. With some exceptions, status icons and SAO held to a general pattern. Debuffs had black backgrounds and buffs were a different color. So it was highly probable that the blue flower icon was also a negative status. It took all my willpower not to touch her little forehead to check her temperature. There was still a golden question mark floating over Ninir's head. As long as the sign of the quest giver remained present, our connection couldn't be severed, I decided. "What is the state she's in?" I asked Kyo. The loyal maid bit her lip in frustration and whispered, "Lady Ninir is in a deep sleep induced by medicine. Did you explain to them about her, Lady Kismel?" The knight nodded gently. "I did, although I was not certain if I was right to do so of my own accord." "No, I thank you for saving me the time," said Kyo, giving her a look of gratitude. She turned to me. "As you heard, Lady Ninir is an immortal lord of the night. Even I do not know her actual age, only that she has watched over the Nochtoi family and their grand casino for over 300 years. 300? I couldn't find the words. The moment I'd heard she was a vampire, I had a suspicion she wasn't as young as she looked. But the truth was an entire digit greater than what I expected. Now it made much more sense that Kismel had taken a knee. I motioned for her to continue. "Lord of the Night is said to have everlasting life, but things that are harmless to us, like sunlight and pure silver, are terrible poison to them. However, a brief moment of direct sunlight, or a small wound from a silver weapon, can be recovered from if treated properly. The argent serpent silver venom, however, cannot be removed from the body once it is inside. If left unattended, it will take only a single night to..." Kyo could not finish that sentence. She reached out and brushed Ninir's golden hair with her fingertips, as though checking that the flame of her life was still burning. Satisfied, she pulled back, then lifted a small blue bottle from the side table. It seemed to be empty already. "So I use this elixir, this poison of the lobelia flower to put her to sleep." "Poison of the lobelia?" Kismel gasped. She looked from Kyo to the blue bottle, shocked. "That is the poison that even the ring of purification Her Majesty gave me cannot cure. A single drop of it can kill. You gave her that entire bottle?" "Lords of the Night have a powerful resistance to poison. All poisons except for silver, that is. In any case, I could not put Lady Ninir to sleep without using this much of it." "I see," said Argo, breaking her silence at last. She looked quite pensive. "Fight poison with poison, eh? So Lady Ninir is not just sleeping. She's kind of in a comatose state, I assume." "That is correct. This is how we can keep the effect of silver poisoning to a minimum." "And if we keep her asleep until the effect of the silver poisoning wears off, Lady Ninir should survive?" Asuna asked, clutching her hands together in prayer. But Kyo let out a long, heavy breath and shook her head. "No, the silver poisoning will not naturally go away. Even as we speak, it is slowly but surely eating away at her body, devouring her life. The sleep may be slowed down, but even in this state, she will last 2 days at most. Her voice was calm but tinged with deep anguish, lamentation, and anger. I could tell that the anger was directed at Bart Dunn for setting up the trap, and at herself for failing to stop it. I felt the same thing within myself. In fact, I now realized I was biting my lip with frustration. "Oh," Asuna gasped. She opened her window and brought out a crystal colored in a deep rosy pink. Abruptly, I too murmured, "Oh." She took a step toward Kyo and held out the 8-sided crystal. "Do you think this could heal Lady Ninir?" "A crystal of healing? But it is so rare, so valuable," Kyo said, unable to hide her shock. Asuna shook her head firmly. "No, I'd give this up in a second if it meant saving her life. Right, Kirito?" I quickly nodded in response. "Yes, we can always get more of them." "Thank you. Your generosity is too kind," said Kyo, bowing her head, but she did not reach out to accept the crystal Asuna was offering. She put her hands on it and pushed away. "But I'm afraid even this would not work. To cure the poison requires a crystal of purification, not a crystal of healing. Because Lords of the Night are so powerfully resistant to poison, they are also nearly immune to the medicine of humans and elves. Crystals are no exception." "No way." Asuna lowered her chin, clutching the healing crystal to her chest. I started to reach out for her, then drew my hand away in a hurry. There was a question I needed to ask again. "But Kyo, you said there was a way, just one way, to cure silver poisoning. What is it?" "Dragon's blood." "Dragon's blood?" I repeated, waiting for her explanation. But Kyo was not in any rush to explain. She just stared at her sleeping master. After a long silence, at least 10 seconds, she finally spoke in a hushed whisper. "Perhaps you are aware that the Lords of the Night must drink human blood to stay alive." For a brief moment, I was taken aback, but it should have been obvious. She was a vampire, in fact. For all the times I had been in this room, I could not recall seeing Ninir drink anything but that red wine. Meaning, that red wine was actually human blood? I asked, afraid to hear the answer. Q gave me a frail smile and shook her head. "No, that is actually wine. Very fine wine. While it might contradict what I said in the 10 years I have served her, and it's most likely long before it, Lady Ninir has never drank human blood. This is what she drinks instead." She pulled a small black bottle out of a pouch she kept at her side. It was the object she'd offered Ninir outside the stable entrance when Ninir walked across the sunset light and collapsed, but she refused to drink it. "What is that?" "It is the one thing that the Lord of the Night can substitute for human blood. Dragon's blood. According to legend, it provides a far greater vitality than mere human blood, but it must be diluted by spirits in order to be stored for long periods of time. And it was treated with many kinds of medicinal herbs, so the effects is greatly weakened. Lady Ninir drinks 1 bottle every 7 days, and that is how she has lived without human blood." Asuna and Argo, Kismel, and I were lost in silence once more. We stared at the sleeping girl's face. I didn't know why Ninir refused to drink human blood, and I had a feeling I should not ask Kyo for the answer. All I knew for certain was that Ninir was going to die within 2 days if we did nothing. I wanted to save her. So, if she drinks fresh dragon's blood that hasn't been diluted or preserved, Ninir can overcome the silver poisoning? That's right, Asuna worried. But where will we find a dragon? There hasn't been a single one on any floor thus far. She was right. Ever since the early days of tabletop gaming, dragons and fantasy role-playing games had been inseparable. But in Einkrad, they were as rare as vampires. We'd heard of the Dread Dragon, Schmargor, and the Water Dragon, Zarkea. But, as Asuna said, we never encountered a single one. But that streak would end here on the 7th floor. I shared a look with Argo, and we spoke together at the Labyrinth Tower. In the boss chamber. Huh? Asuna was wide-eyed with surprise. She turned to look in the direction of the tower, blocked by thick stone walls, then swiveled back to me. Her surprise turned into unease. You mean the floor boss? She whispered. The boss of the 7th floor is a dragon? Yes, finally. Or already, if you want to see it that way. I was going to name drop the boss dragon, but reconsidered, thinking it wouldn't be good to present concrete details like that before Kyo and Kismel. We could fool them into thinking our inventories and instant messages were adventurers' magical charms, but we couldn't explain away advanced knowledge from the beta test. Fortunately, Kyo did not seem suspicious that Argo and I knew the floor boss was a dragon. She nodded seriously. That's right. In the tower far to the west is a flame dragon, known as Aguilar. If you can defeat it, there should be more than enough blood to save Lady Ninir's life. Aguilar, I repeated, sounding the name out. It seemed off to me. The 7th floor boss in the beta was definitely a fire dragon, but the full name was something like Aguilar the Igneous Worm in English. It was only once I mentally examined the letters that I realized that Aguila was how you pronounced that name. During the beta test, the game did not feature any official guides for how to pronounce monsters' names. They were written entirely in English, so you either had to hear it out loud from an NPC or guess it on your own. There weren't any NPCs in the beta who mentioned the boss's name, so mentally, I ended up calling it something like Achir, like it was French. Apparently I was dead wrong. Thanking my lucky stars I hadn't proudly spoken it out loud. To Kyo, I said, so the point is, we just need to beat Aguilar and get its blood, right? We need to pass through that tower and get to the next floor anyway, so we'll have to fight it sooner or later. Belatedly, I realized that later wasn't an option. Wait, Kyo, you said 2 days? That's right, said the warrior maid. I stared closely at her face. Volupta was located precisely between the main town of Lectio and the Labyrinth Tower, and the difficult level ahead was going to be much higher than the Tailwind Road that took us to this point. A highly motivated team would still take from morning until night just to get to the tower entrance. It would take another full day to reach the top floor. In other words, if we left as soon as possible, let's say tomorrow morning, it would be nearly impossible to beat the floor boss before the evening, 2 days from now. Plus, even assuming Kismel's assistance, it would be suicide for the 4 of us to tackle a boss on our own, while the beta team included a majority of members who'd gone bankrupt, including me, defeating Aguilar had required a huge raid party with over 50 members. The help of the ALS and the DKB would be necessary to tackle the floor boss, but neither seemed ready to leave this town before they got the sword of Volupta. I leaned over to Argo and asked quietly, were they taking part in the daytime arena? Of course, Both of them seemed to have a brand new cheat sheets, and they won all 5 daytime matches. That just meant they were even less likely to be interested in what I had to say before the night matches were finished. And if they lost all their chips at night, they'd probably just go through the same damn thing tomorrow, too. I hurried back to Kyo and tried to explain the situation as briefly and transparently as possible. We needed the cooperation of the adventurers staying in this town in order to defeat Aguilar, the igneous worm. But they were entranced by the Sword of Volupta, the grand prize of the casino, and they would continue gambling until they got it or were completely broke. I also brought up that there was a questionable cheat sheet they were using for their betting strategy. When I was finished, Q gave my tale careful consideration and exhaled heavily. I see. The Grand Casino that the Corloys and the Notchoys founders built for their own enrichment is now ironically endangering Lady Nenir's life. That's being too pessimistic, Asuna stated. She put the healing crystal back into item storage and stepped forward, clasping Kyo's hand in her own. Those brothers who first built the casino might have been thinking of money, but Lady Nenir's runs the casino fairly and faithfully to provide a respite for those who come seeking entertainment, doesn't she? All those visitors of Volupta provide business to the restaurants and hotels and other businesses here. Lady Nenir's been working hard for centuries for the sake of all the people who lived in this town. It's not right to act like this is all fate. I was startled to see that there were tears forming in Asuna's eyes. I had just assumed she was against the casino's existence due to her dislike of gambling. She probably still hated it, but maybe she didn't think the casino was pure evil because it also served as a tourist attraction. It was the long, stable operation of the Grand Casino that brought this town its vitality and loveliness, and it was hard to argue that it wasn't due to Nenir's skill and nobility. Asuna's so much more mature than me, I thought, adding my hands on top of where my partners held Kyo's. I don't think the casino that Lady Nenir put so much of her love into would stab her in the back. I'm sure there will be a way for us to get the frontline group, the adventurers, to leave before the end of the night. The point is, we just need one of the two groups to earn 100,000 chips through the night arena, I said, considering this carefully. I'm almost certain that their cheat sheets are a Corloy chap. Out of the 10 matches, only the last one has false information. Where they can make off with all the chips their bettors built up to that point. So if they bet the opposite of what the sheet says, they should win. But then I remembered we talked about the same thing yesterday. But that's working under the assumption that the Corley family can only lose the match on purpose. Kyo, in a match that's been set up with the intent to lose, do you suppose there's a way to flip the result into a win? I asked. For some reason, the arm maid just made a face and said nothing. Belatedly, I realized I was indirectly holding Kyo's hand through Asuna's and pulled back with haste. Asuna removed her hand next, and Kyo cleared her throat to speak at last. It was our failure that we did not realize the Corloy family was distributing these cheat sheets, as you call them. Now that I think of it, it seems that every time there is an especially big gambler present, the Corloy monster is more likely to lose in the final match. Lady Nenir and I are careful to watch the wrongdoings, but to think that they would lose on purpose? She paced around the bedside twice, stared at the sleeping Nenir again, then continued firmly. It would not be too difficult to lose intentionally in the match between monsters of equivalent rank. Each family monster trainer have hundreds of years of accumulated knowledge behind them in the arena of monster health management. Just as there are medicines that cure wounds and illnesses, other herbs can excite monsters or weaken them or kill them. If given an herb, a poison, that slows the monster's reactions before the match in violation of the rules, that monster would be highly likely to lose. But in order to overturn that into a win, you would have to not only remove the poison effect, you would need to give them a medicine that brings out strength. The chip payout rates are determined by numerical charm just before the match, which wouldn't leave enough time to feed the monster a number of different concoctions. In other words, there is no way to overturn a match the Corloys are determined to lose, I asked, feeling somewhat relieved, but I did not get an affirmative answer from Keo. After a few seconds, she opened her pursed lips and said, "As you saw, Bardan Corloy is a crafty man. While he might possess by fear of death, it has not dulled his wits. There is no way that a man like him would fail to take into account the possibility that his trapped cheat sheet might be discovered. I would assume he has some way of turning a loss into a win that doesn't involve medicines. I just cannot guess what that is." I see. I thought back on what I'd seen in the monster arena, but with the cage surrounded on 3 sides by onlookers, I couldn't imagine any way of tampering with the monsters. At best, I came up with the possibility of shooting something small, like a dart, through the bars to hit the monster, but that was almost certainly to be discovered. There was no way to ensure that the ALS and the DKB win in the night arena, I thought, crestfallen, but then Asuna gasped. I glanced at her. The fencer hazel brown eyes blinked several times. Her face was slack as she murmured, "It's so simple. Just have the ALS and the DKB bet on different monsters for the final match. Then one of them is guaranteed to win, and they'll have the 100,000 chips, right?" "Oh!" I gasped too. She was exactly right. Not even Bardan Corloy could manage to make both monsters win or lose. In fact, if Lynn and Cabal had just bet on different monsters last night, one of them would have the Sword of Volupta already. They'd have spent the day slicing up powerful monsters in the second half of this floor with its broken specs. The problem was how to get them to agree on betting different monsters. But there had to be a way to do that. I thought of some people who might be willing to hear us out, just to be sure. Asked Keo, "Listen, I'm not doubting it, but is the stuff in the pamphlet about the sword worth 100,000 chips all true? All the poison nullification, constant healing, and every attack being a critical? Because it's almost preposterous." "That is exactly what doubting is," she pointed out with a smirk before adopting a serious expression again. "The Sword of Volupta is indeed the sword of the hero Falhari, who defeated Zachary, the water worm. There is no falsehoods in the descriptions. Lady Ninir said previously, but it is the treasure of the Notchtoy and Corloy clans and the symbol of the true heir of the family. So one wonders why Falhari's son would turn it into a casino prize. And that is the question my lady would not answer." That was indeed a good question. It seemed a little too hasty to turn around and use the Dragon Slayer's heroic sword, a memento of their ancestors, as a tool for pulling in crowds. But as long as the sword really did have the specs on the listing, that was enough. Aguilar didn't have a poison attack, assuming no changes since the beta, but the HP regeneration would help against its flame breath, and a guaranteed critical hit would also do wonders against its tough scales. I didn't know if it was the ALS Cabao or the DKB's Lind who would wield the sword, but neither was the kind to shrink in fear from the game's first real dragon boss. If he stood in as a main attacker and allowed the rest of us to focus on support, we'd be able to finish the boss in short order. But that was assuming we broke through the Labyrinth Tower before sundown 2 days from now. The time limit to save Ninir's life, if we couldn't leave Volupta tonight, then we could go early in the morning and reach the town of Premio by night and spend the evening, then tackle the labyrinth the final day. But even that would be cutting it very close. Then I realized something and gasped, sucking in a sharp breath. It was impossible for us to match that schedule. Before noon tomorrow, we needed to stake out the Shrine of the Sacred Key on the southwest edge of the floor, then follow the Dark Elf retrieval team coming to get the Ruby Key, fighting off the fallen elves who were sure to stage an ambush and pin down the location of their hideout. If we missed that event tomorrow, there would likely never be another chance to take back the 4 sacred keys Kaisara stole. And then Kismel would eternally be in exile from her own people. Nothing more than an escaped convict from Heron Tree Palace as a suspected spy. If we saved Kismel, we couldn't save Ninir, and vice versa. It was a dilemma like none I'd ever faced before. I balled my hands into fists and found myself looking to my partner for help. There was a deep anguish in Asana's eyes. She must have realized from the moment Kyo said that only the dragon's blood could save Ninir, and the dragon was the boss of the floor, that there wasn't enough time to do both. We couldn't bring ourselves to say the word, but Kismel gently asked Asana, "Asana, Kirito, why are you hesitating?" She strode over to us and tapped our arms. "It will be fine. There will be plenty of chances to take back the sacred keys. But Lady Ninir's life is in danger now. Let us worry about saving her. I will assist you in vanquishing the dragon, of course." "Kismel," Asana whispered. She clutched Kismel's hand. Kia watched this interaction with great confusion. "What are you talking about?" Back in the living room, we put on tea together and had a seat on the couches. Kia refused to sit on Ninir's long sofa, so the 5 of us sat on 2 smaller couches instead. They might have been subsized in comparison, but they were still 3-seaters, so it wasn't uncomfortable at all. After moistening my throat with warm tea, I explained to Kyo the problem Kismel was facing, with her permission, of course. Kyo scowled and considered the story for quite a while in silence, then glanced towards the door as though her brother, Huazo, and the monster handler, Lunze, were standing guard in the hallway, were in danger of overhearing. She dropped her voice. "Do any of you recognize the word Nusian?" Before I could even react, Kismel's head shot upward. "Miss Kyo, where did you hear that?" "I will explain in a moment, but first, could you tell me what it means?" The knight seemed to hesitate for a moment, then slowly began to speak. "It is a very old word. It means one who is with neither Lysulans nor Calicians. In other words, the fallen elves, but it is considered the greatest of slurs towards them. No one uses that word anymore. I see, as I expected, said Kyo, suggesting that she was anticipating this answer. She lifted her teacup to her lips for a sip, then looked at Asuna, Argo, and me. Do you remember Lady Nenir saying that Bardan Korloi was gathering a huge sum of money in order to buy a brief extra bit of life? We nodded. I'd noticed that, and it bugged me. SAO had an orthodox fantasy aesthetic, but I never heard anything about a means to extend one's lifespan in exchange for money. Yet. In hushed tones, Kyo continued. I once asked Lady Nenir what this means exactly. The only thing she said that it was a wicked Nusian plot, and would not tell me anything more. After Lady Kismel's explanation, however, it fell into place for me. The fallen elves have made a contract with Bardan and offered him some kind of deal. Speaking of which, Asuna said, throwing a glance my way, the dark elves were saying something about us back at the Hereditary Palace, that they must have offered to extend our lives, and that humans always fell for that. Oh, it flooded back to me at last, but to be honest, the more vivid memory in my mind was the snort of outrage Asuna had made when she heard them say it. Argo's cheeks twitched with a smirk, as though she were watching it happen before her eyes. She leaned back against the plush cushions. Aha! I gotcha now. So this is a common trick the Fallen like to play. It does give us hope of a way forward, however. Huh? What do you mean? I asked, befuddled. The info dealer wagged her eyebrows at me rather obnoxiously. Listen. If the fallen elves have brought old Bardan a deal, then it's a real good chance he's got a means to contact them too. And with that in our pocket, we might have a way to get the fallen hideout without needing your complex pursuit plan. Ah, I cried. Asuna immediately brought her finger to her lips and shushed me, while Kismel just smiled. She said to Argo, Your suspicion is most likely correct. The Fallen have many eerie tools and charms, and one of them is the ability to send signals to far-off places. Perhaps they use such a thing to arrange a meeting at an agreed-upon location. Wouldn't that be handy? Murmured Argo enviously. I knew how she felt. We players could send entire messages, not just signals, but it wouldn't work if one of the two people was in a dungeon, and that was when you wanted the communication the most. Even an item that just transmitted light and sound would allow for much better cooperative play. But if Argo was correct, the fallen elves had given Bardan some kind of item for communication. The problem is how we're going to get our hands on it, I murmured, only to be met with the lackadaisical voice from my left. We just gotta steal it, obviously. Huh? Argo was leaning back, hands behind her head, legs crossed. Her painted whiskers were perked upward in a confident smirk. Bardan might be greedy, miser, but he wouldn't sell this thing for thousands upon thousands of coal. He probably won't even admit he's got it. So we'll just have to sneak into his room and steal it, eh? Oh, come on, I said. Kismel was an honorable enough knight that she even hesitated to escape from prison in order to restore her unfairly ruined reputation, and Kyo was a servant of the Nutch Toys, who had sworn to uphold the order of the Grand Casino. It stood to reason, I thought, that neither would take kindly to a blithe suggestion of burglary under this roof. But Kismel said, I believe Argo is correct. Yes, that seems to be the only way to do it, agreed Keo. Right, of course, I agreed, grimacing. Next to me, Asuna shifted. She was probably biting back a smile. I pretended I didn't notice and continued. Still, it's going to be really hard to sneak into his chambers. We don't know when he leaves his place. And where does he live anyway? That question was for Keo. The battle maid glanced at the door, then looked back at me. Just over there, in the room 7 of the Grand Casino Hotel, right across from the building from room 17 here. What? I yelped. I couldn't help myself. Asuna shushed me again. The enemy boss was living right under our noses this whole time? So why did it seem like I'd never seen any Corloys inside the hotel? Keo could sense my skepticism and pulled a rolled parchment from the drawer of the coffee table. She spread it on the flat surface. This is a layout of the hotel. As you can see, the facilities like the bath, kitchen, and storage area are in the center of the building, while all the guest rooms are on the northern and southern walls. But only the hotel entrance and hallway to the shared facilities offer passage between the north and south sides. Oh, so that's why there's been no windows in the bath, Asuna cried. I'd passed on the bath, but indeed, it was located on the western side of the center of the building, surrounded by hallways to the south, north, and west, and the wall of a different facility to the east. The hallways split north and south from the entrance, then turned 90 degrees to the west, traveling along the building until they hit a dead end. In other words, passing from one to the other required cutting through the bath or kitchen. I see, so the only things the Corloys and Noche share are the entrance, the bath, and the kitchen, I murmured. Q quickly added, as a matter of fact, the only hotel employees may enter the kitchen or storage room, and the bathing time for each family is strictly divided. So the only times they might come face to face are at the front lobby. Uh-huh. And when are the Corloys' bathing hours? From 9 until midnight, and the Nochtoi hours are from noon until 3. 3 to 9 is the slot for the hotel guests to bathe. And what about midnight to noon? Those hours are reserved for cleaning and water replacement. Ah, I see. I thought the natural bath beneath the castle galley had been open 24 hours a day, but that might have been the exception to the rule. In any case, we're going to sneak into Bardun's room. Our only chance will be while he's in the bath. After 9 o'clock, though. It's a long wait ahead of us. It was currently 6:20 in the evening. If Bardun waited until 11 o'clock to take his bath, that was a wait of 4.5 hours, and the night matches of the Monster Arena started at 9. We needed to get working on our plan for the ALS and the DKB. It was going to be a tightrope walk. Across from me, Keo murmured worriedly, "But Bardun will have guards outside the bath entrance while he bathes, and the door of the room 7 is visible from there. It'll be extremely difficult to sneak in without being noticed." Oh, crestfallen, I let my eyes drop to the hotel layout on the table again. Indeed, the north-facing door on the great bath opened right into the hallway near Bardun's room. 2 doors were not even 50 feet apart. If the guards standing next to the watch so much as glanced to their right, they would have a perfect view of any trespasser. In this situation, the standard thing to do was make noise in the opposite direction to distract the guards, but there is no way to get the opposite side of the hall. Someone could speak to the guards to occupy them, but they couldn't hold a conversation long for the infiltrator to find the item we needed and escape without seeming extremely unnatural. I grumbled deep in my throat, deliberating on our quandary. Q spoke up again. When going to the casino stables downstairs, they don't put guards up in the hall, I believe. But unless something extreme happens, I doubt Bardun will be leaving this floor tonight. What would count as extreme? Well, if another phantom thief like you strikes, for example. If there is a riot in the casino. I see. Maybe I need to slip back down to the Corloy stables again and make off with a giant pincer rat this time. I thought desperately, but I ruled out the idea just as quickly. They'd clearly stepped up their security, and the Corloys had seen my face now, so if I got caught, it would be a total disaster. Perhaps causing a scene in the casino was the only option. By the way, what kind of stir would it have to be to get Bardun Corloy to bolt out of his room? I asked, perhaps a little too innocently. Hugh considered it. From what I can remember, Bardun has come down to resolve a situation when there has been a disagreement between guests about cheating with cards that turned into a big fight. When some rich child saw a monster in the arena and had a screaming meltdown to have it as a pet, and when a guest with astronomically good roulette luck placed a huge bet at the wheel.
Ah, Argo proclaimed. Keyboy, A-chan, what if you got down to the casino and get into a little knockdown, drag-out fight on the floor?
The scary thing was that I couldn't tell if she was joking or serious, so I replied with a straight-faced, "Maybe you should roll around on the ground in the arena and scream, 'Buy me that monster! Buy me that monster!' instead." The info dealer and I traded level gazes, each daring the other to blink. Asuna sighed and interjected, "Neither of those is a sure bet. As for the third possibility, Kyo, the big win doesn't have to be at a roulette table, right?" "Right. Bardun's only concern is the casino losing income. His income, I should say. Whether cards or dice or whatever, he is uneasy about big rollers putting thousands upon thousands of chips in wins." Asuna looked at me. I quickly shook my head. "You're dreaming if you think we can intentionally win big at any of those casino games. If that were possible, I wouldn't have..." I had to catch myself before I started revealing what happened to me in the beta test, but Asuna caught my drift and picked up where I left off. I know, but while roulette and cards tables might be out of the question, there is one place where you can win up to a certain amount with a sure bet." "Huh?" I gaped. On Asuna's other side, Kismel nodded wisely. "Ah, you mean the arena. According to what you said, the first 4 matches of the night will play out as the sheet said, yes? So if they shove all their money, bet all their chips, they might be able to compile winnings alarming enough to bring Bardun out of his chamber." Oh, right. It seemed to me that Kismel's AI was not just smarter than me with a better memory, but it was also surpassing me in imagination. True, that's a much more practical option than testing our luck on the roulette wheel, I admitted, but the ALS and the DKB won over 50,000 chips through the 4th match last night, and Bardun didn't show up then, so we must be prepared for winnings that big. We need to win at least an extra 50,000 to get him out of his room, I'm guessing. But it's already going to be hard enough to get Lind and Kabao to get on different monsters. How are we also going to get them to add more to the pot? Even with communication skills 10 times better than my own, I didn't think my partner was capable of handling this one. But Asuna just shook her head and said to my utter shock, "We're not going to force the ALS and the DKB to bet more. We're going to do the betting. How many coal do you have right now, Kirito?"
What? It was all I could do to not scream. Instead, my mouth just hung open, soundlessly, for a few seconds. Well, if I sell all my excess items, I might be able to get 100,000 coal. Same for me then. So we can combine that for 200,000 coal, which would convert to 200,000 chips, right? The odds in the arena are always between 1.5 and 3 to 1. Winning 4 matches in a row, betting everything, that should put us over 50,000, just like the others. If there are 3 people putting in huge bets on the final match, wouldn't you think that would draw Bardun's attention? Well, I suppose. But despite my agreement, there was no way to know who'd win the final match at this point. If everyone lost, then Lind and Kiba would only lose 20-something thousand coal in total between yesterday and today. But we would be losing all of our assets. And even if we won, we'd only be able to buy casino prices. And it was very unlikely we'd be able to sell those items to recoup the monetary value. Of course, I didn't want to skimp out on whatever cost to save Ninir, but if lack of funds made us unable to update our equipment or restock on consumable items, it might ultimately put Asana's life in danger. I could pay 50,000 gold too. In shock, I turned my face to the person who had made the offer, Kyo. She mistook my expression, however, because the battlemaid looked away and murmured, "I'm ashamed that it is the best I can do when my lady's life hangs in the balance. But that is the entirety of my assets, saved after 10 years of work. Of course, there is an unimaginable amount locked away in the Notre family vault, but only Lady Ninir can open that." No, the opposite, I insisted, trying to correct her mistake. I wasn't thinking that 50,000 was too little. I was worried that it might be too much. I mean, if we happen to guess wrong in the final battle, we'll lose everything. And even if we win, you won't be getting the original amount back. Losing my money means nothing to me. Huazo and I could serve our entire lives for free and still not repay the obligation we owe to Lady Ninir. I didn't really understand what she meant by this initially, but the expression on Kyo's face told me she didn't want to answer any further questions on the subject, so I withdrew my curiosity. Asuna gave me a little nod of agreement. It seemed ethically questionable to allow NPCs to entrust players with 50,000 coal, but if we refused, Kyo was only going to be more hurt, given that she was already blaming herself for not stopping the poison snake. All right, your 50,000 coal will be a tremendous help to us. Thank you. Asuna and I bowed deeply to show our appreciation, but it seemed to unnerve Kyo, who insisted, "Please, raise your heads. I am the one who should be thanking you." But it was like a bowing competition over the coffee table.
"All right, enough already,"
said a third party, who tossed a clinking pouch onto the table the size of a fist.
"I'll go in your gamble, key boy. That's 50,000 right there."
Huh? She jabbed her finger right at my nose.
"But you better win. Got that? Then not only will lure Bardun out, we'll also get that sword. 2 birds with 1 stone."
It's not going to be that easy, I thought. But I couldn't say that now that we were all on the same page. So all I could do was nod without a word.